Economic Education, executive editor of the Laissez-Faire books, and research fellow of the Acton Institute. He's founder of the Cryptocurrency Conference, serves as economic consultant to the popular podcast Let's Talk Bitcoin, and writes a fortnightly column for Crisis Magazine. He's author of Bourbon for Breakfast, It's a Jetsons World, and A Beautiful Anarchy. Following his 15 years as editor and builder of the website Mises.org, he now curates and writes editorial introductions to the product offerings for the Laissez-Faire Club, and is also working on a new commercial venture that will be announced later this year. So please welcome Jeffrey Tucker.
It's so good to see you. I think that bio might be a little bit dated. My new commercial venture to be announced later this year is actually Liberty.me, which was announced 2 years ago, but that's okay. Everything else is the same. It's good. Well, it's nice. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to say that that this debate on the, well, I'm really glad to talk about this issue. I actually happen to think it's one of the most important issues we face, namely prohibition among the age group 18 to 21. I think it's a cultural calamity and a massive assault on human rights. And it's a scandal to me that hardly anybody is talking about it. And when I began to look into the issue, I found myself just mortified at just the complete absence of material on the subject. There was an organization of college presidents and chancellors that was started about 5 years ago to lower the drinking age, and the gentleman who started it raised lots of money but couldn't find a single lawmaker anywhere in the country who was interested in doing anything about the problem. So he gave a lot of the money back, if you can believe it, just because nobody seemed to care. I mean, it's an outrage. And part of the problem is that people in this age group, they're politically powerless. There's no lobbying group out there to push for this, really. And people in that age group, they're too busy sort of hiding and sneaking around or whatever and being just sort of getting by, and are not in a position to lobby legislators. And the worst thing about it is that, imagine if you went to your state senator or something and said, look, I'm 19, I think it's an outrage, I can't order a beer. You're immediately going to get a lecture. Why exactly is it so important to you? Can you not do without drinking? Have you gone to the doctor or maybe a psychiatrist to check it to see if you have an alcohol problem? So immediately, the accusations start turning inward on the people who just want to be treated like adults. So young people understand that the worst thing you can do is complain about this, because then people begin to suspect that you've got a serious problem. Society just assumes that because you pass a law that says, don't drink until you're 21, everybody's going to say, oh, okay, I won't do that. And that'll be the end of the story. And it's a scandal. It's a disaster because, of course, as you well know, people are not complying with the law and haven't been for 30 years. So I was really happy to write this article I've written a series of articles on the topic, and I was one of the first people in the space, and I was just Googling the search term drinking age, and I found that I'm something like, my article in Newsweek magazine is something like the 8th link listed there, which is awesome for me because I feel like maybe my article can make a difference. I think we're just at the beginnings of the change. There are 3 states that are currently considering a change in the drinking age law. One is New Hampshire, one's Minnesota, I think, and the third one is California. And the changes in the laws are things that are a little bit, sort of marginal changes in New Hampshire and Minnesota. They're things like, if you're 18, then you can go to a public bar and order beer or wine so long as you're with somebody who's 21. Yeah, that's it. That's a tiny change, and it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. The California law, which is going to be on the ballot at the end of this year, will actually consider a dramatic reduction for everybody. So if you turn 18, oh, guess what? You can actually be like an adult and go to a liquor store and buy, whatever. So that's I don't expect it's going to pass, unfortunately. but it's a start. I mean, you have to have the debate at least starting. So the question is like, why is this important? And I mean, well, let me just put it in context. Um, when I turned, I mean, you can't believe it really, but when I turned 18, I was old enough to drink. And hold on, let me turn off this heater real quick. Because I was grandfathered into the old law, which was 18, and life is normal, and it had been that way since about 1930. Well, I guess it would have been January of 1933 when prohibition was repealed. So it was kind of neat. And of course, up until that time, like everybody between the ages of 15 and 18. People did dumb things like sneak out of the windows at night and sit around with their friends doing dumb things like drinking hot beers, under a bush or something. I did that too. So it was awesome when I turned 18 because then I was suddenly like society treated me like an adult. And the first thing I did is went out and bought a case of wine. And the extent of my drinking was sipping wine while doing my studying, in the evening. And that was it. And I never thought anything about it. But 3 weeks after I turned 18, there was a national law went into place, and I was grandfathered in, or at least it went into effect. I was grandfathered in, so that suddenly, if you were born 3 weeks after I was born, you had to wait an additional 3 years before you could drink, and thus began this weird culture of prohibition on campus. And now here we are 30 years later, and it's taken a very mature form. So it's a form that all of you recognize and all of you understand, and you think it's normal, but I'm just here to tell you that it is not normal. It's extremely strange, and it's got rituals associated with it, and a vast amount of very, I would say, very damaging abuse, and I'm sure you agree with me, and you've probably participated in it. And I don't even know where to begin with this, and probably you could tell me more about this than I could tell you. But it involves, first of all, secrecy, right? So you can't go into a bar. In fact, it's a little strange. Like, you don't even know if you're going to be allowed into the bar or not. It's not just that you can't order a drink. Mostly if you can get into the bar, then somebody else can order you a drink and say, oh, bring me a gin and tonic. Oh, I'd like another one. And then sort of slide it over to you, and you sort of surreptitiously drink it and hide from the wait staff and blah, blah, blah. And that works. But I don't know what's going on in Florida. But in a lot of places, they don't even let you in. I mean, in a place like Michigan, you can't even get into the bar. So it's created this weird segregation among friends. So some of your friends are 21 and older, and they're like hip and like, oh, I'm cool. I can get, I can go anywhere. I can do whatever I want. Except that if they have a friend who's 20 or 19, then they have to slough them off and go somewhere else, which creates a great deal of resentment among people who are 18 to 21. Like, how come you can do this and I can't? And there's a desperate need to sort of grow up and be mature at this age. So what the people in this age group, 18 to 20, do is try to cobble together awesome drinking environments to entice their 21 and older friends to not go to the public bars, but rather come into their weird private drinking spaces, which can include dorm rooms, of course, which are actually sort of dangerous settings and only hold so many people. Frat houses, which are very popular places to hold drinking parties. And then, of course, local homes rented by students. And I don't know what it's like in your neighborhood, but I live in Atlanta, and Georgia State is like right down the street from me. So any property that's around the campus is worth a lot more as a rental venue than it is as a venue to own. And you rent it to students, all of which are then rented out to actual, and this is true, and maybe I'm not telling you anything you don't know, entrepreneurs who front the money for the booze, plus a vast subsidy to the people who are renting the house to take over their house for one night, charge admission, and have vast amounts of liquor for everybody. Oh, isn't that wonderful? The problem is that in these settings, these are not normal environments, right? These are not like adults um, with a civilized sense of how to drink. So the goal in these occasions, especially since you can't account on this being available to you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, they're only available Friday night, and maybe you're not going to get into the Saturday night party, so you have to drink yourself silly to make up for all the time that you've missed. So there's a kind of a strange culture of alcohol abuse that exists in these circumstances, um, and it's absolutely pervasive in frat houses today. And if you're bored with my lecture so far because you think I'm just saying the obvious, don't walk out yet. But I mean, jungle juice exists, in the middle of the room, typically in a trash barrel, and you just pour everything into there with ice and whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Drink as much as possible. And everybody I know in this age group has a blacking out story, or people who have gone through this age group who have a blackout story of having drank too much and woke up in a place they didn't recognize in circumstances that they very much regret. But I can just tell you that this didn't exist even 30 years ago. And you can say, oh, the culture collapsed. Oh, young people today are irresponsible. I don't believe that. I think this is just prohibition. We've recreated prohibition from the 1920s and focused it in on this one little age group. It's like a microcosm in an age where people are trying to experiment with what it's like to be mature. Society has made it impossible for that sort of process to take place in a civilized way. My favorite example of what this prohibition has done is pre-gaming, which is a weirdly hilarious institution to me. If it's not hilarious, it's actually dangerous and tragic. But so any drinker knows that the only way to drink is to drink a little bit at a time. If you're going to be out to 2 a.m., you start slow, and then you ramp it up a little bit, and you ramp it up a little bit more, and then you pull back and you pull back, so that by the time you go to bed, you've already been sort of getting sober for a couple of hours, and then everything's fine. Your night goes well. Well, if you have to pregame, which means drinking as much as possible because you've got uncertainty about what's going to come in that night. Is the party going to have liquor? Can you get into the bar? Is your fake ID going to work? You don't really know, so you have to drink as much as possible. So this has become an institution. So, let's pregame. And the amount of liquor that this age group can consume before you go out on a party is absolutely beyond belief, because you think somehow, and again, I think this is like a mistake, you believe that you have to drink an entire, and it's not funny, but I'm still laughing, an entire night's liquor in like an hour before you arrive at the place you want to be. So there's all these kind of rituals that are associated with this, from shotgunning, beers, beer after beer after beer, up to eight beers, because you got to prepare for the whole night. Pulling bags out of boxes and slapping them so the bubbles go away, so it rushes into your mouth as fast as possible, or doing pulls on handles of bourbon, or ideally doing all three, since of course you have to drink 8 hours of liquor all in the course of 30 minutes or whatever is available to you. And this, how should I say, gets the night off to a bad start. And it doesn't actually work. Pre-gaming is not work, but somehow people still believe it and they still practice it. I don't know what to tell you except that none of this ritualistic, abusive, preposterous kind of drinking habits existed before prohibition existed, and also it's unique to the U.S. I mean, I have interns who come from Australia and Germany and Spain and Italy and England and and Canada and Mexico and any other civilized country in the world who come to the U.S. They've been drinking for 2 years, and then they can't go into a 7-Eleven and buy a can of beer. So their impression is, what's with this country they're infantilizing me and get furious about it. It's really an outrage. I mean, you have to look long and hard to find countries that have drinking age laws as severe as the U.S. Um, and there's strange countries like, Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan and things like this. And any normal developed society, the drinking age is typically, and it's not unusual, 18 for liquor and 16 for wine and beer, which strikes me as at least reasonable. I mean, I should be clear that I don't favor any drinking age laws at all. I think laws in general from the state are unenforceable and silly and just provide occasions for the government just to harass people. So I don't believe in any of this stuff. But if you're going to exist, they should at least be lower. So let me take you back a little bit towards what time are we doing? It was 5:53. So let me go back a little bit to examine something about prohibition. Whenever you think this is a normal country with normal people and a normal political culture, just remember that this is the country that, for whatever reason, imagined that you could pass a constitutional amendment to abolish the production and consumption of liquor. Now, can you imagine that? I mean, here you have something that's been around as long as there are records, so many, many, many thousands of years since the beginning of recorded history. Humankind has drank, some kind of spirits and wine and something approximating beer. And this country imagined that it would be the first in the world and in the history of the world to get rid of it entirely. And why and how? Well, we would just add an amendment to the Constitution, since, of course, that's all it takes. It just takes lawmakers in Washington to write a sentence, have a vote, and have it codified by the most powerful person in the world with a stamp, and that causes the problem of drinking to go away. Well, it didn't work, right? It led to mass criminality, abuse, huge numbers of poisonings, which is, I think, roughly analogous to what I was describing to you about drinking culture today on campus, and political corruption. Since it's so implausible, it leads people to to political payoffs, and so everybody was in the pay of the bootleggers. And there's many prominent families in America today that were originally bootlegging families. So this whole thing was a calamity. And speaking of law breaking, the way this ports itself over, and all of this stuff has ported itself over and exists in our midst right now for this one little age group, between 18 and 21. I mean, the whole of Prohibition culture exists, except it's even worse. Because at least under Prohibition, you had awesome sort of speakeasies with actual mature adults in them. And yeah, there's a lot of abuse, a lot of drunkenness. It sounds like a lot of fun in many ways, passwords, whatever. But you could take the adults out of the equation and put people in there who have just left the supervision of their parents, just gotten out of high school. Imagine for the first time that they're free, and tell them they can't drink. But give them the freedom. Otherwise, they have not the legal freedom, but the volitional freedom to do it. And you've got an explosive situation on your hands. The institution of the fake ID is one of the most remarkable things I've seen. First of all, it's big business. People think the Silk Road was, and it still is, all about distributing narcotics. Actually, fake IDs were a huge market there. They'll run you. A really great one will run, $150 to $200. You can get sort of shabby ones for probably as little as $60. But you better get 2 or 3, because one of those will be confiscated by the bouncer at the bar where you're trying to get in. And sometimes they'll work for a while, and they stop working, it gets confiscated, so you have to pull out the other one. So those are fake IDs. The other thing that is very common is to find somebody who looks just like you, or looks more or less from whatever state, and pay that person to lose their license and go back to the DMV and say, I lost my license. And so then they get another one in the mail, and then they resell that one for $150 or whatever it's going to be. So they have a duplicate person out there pretending to be them, in exchange for which they get money, which strikes me, by the way, as very risky behavior. But you can't believe how common it is. It's just unbelievably common. So one way or another, people manage to get fake IDs. So it's creating this weird culture of lawlessness. And I've known people who have fake IDs who actually began to inhabit the personality and the identity of the person whose ID they're carrying. I mean, it's very strange. It's actually kind of awesome because they begin to think that they're mature. And actually, look, I'm not advocating the fake ID, but I will say this. It's a much safer solution to the drinking problem than frat houses, dorm rooms, and off-campus housing, where the environments are extremely unsafe, where you find that people have sort of, how should I say, their intentions are not entirely trustworthy. It's far better to be able to drink in a public place where there's bartenders who can look after you, where you can follow the bottles from the shelf to the glass. And any woman who's in the room right now knows exactly what I'm referring to. You can't do that in these sort of private spaces, so it gets very dangerous. So you're far safer in public spaces. So these laws have made the world much less safe, and much less, I would say, moral, and much less mature. So now, looking back at it, you have to ask the question, like, why did we ever prohibit liquor in the first place? I mean, how did this come to be? And I've done some reading about this, and it's a little bit interesting, actually. If you go back to the progressive era, the late 19 teens, one of the strangest times in the history of the world for intellectual life, where there was a great fashion for using the law to control people in every way. I mean, this is the age of the origin of everything, the origin of central banking, the income tax, the minimum wage laws, minimum working hours laws, eugenics, World War I, every kind of horrible thing you can possibly imagine passed in this one period. And it was during this exact period when prohibition first began to be imagined, and then it became law. In what year was that? I have to look it up. It was something like 1920, I think. So the idea was this. Let's examine American society and see what's wrong with it. And this is a very puritanical sort of social uplifting generation. And so we've got lots of problems. We've got men who are abandoning their families. We've got people who are living in poverty, hobos, who are not behaving well, people who hit their children, are not educating their children, kids who drop out of school. You name the social problem. There's people are irreligious, whatever the thing is, whatever the social problem is. And in case after case, this generation of extremely naive, scientistic sort of intellectuals discerned and discovered that the common element to all these things is alcohol. Every one of these social maladies can be traced to alcohol. And from that, they concluded that alcohol was somehow causing all this to happen. And therefore, if you get rid of the alcohol, then you get rid of all the social problems. That was the deduction. And then idiot Congress, together with the president, said, oh, well, let's just pass a constitutional amendment, and therefore we'll just create a perfect world. Now, it's really not any more complicated than that. And everybody agreed. Preachers and teachers and intellectuals and everybody. Let's do this thing. Women's Temperance Union and so on. So prohibition happened. Now, I think prohibition lasted about 12 years, if I'm not mistaken, and during which time, murder rate is out of control. Gangs of rum runners are taking over the country. Every politician's in the pay of these high-earning people, and speakeasies are all over the country. Alcohol poisonings go through the roof. It's a great example, right? Government tries to make society better, and the results are exactly the opposite. The intellectuals and the preachers and the activists and the social uplifters were entirely wrong. Everything, their worst nightmares became true. They tried to make the world a better place through force and through laws, and these laws created a world that was far worse than anything that came before. Finally, in 1932, the public protests became just intolerable, and wise politicians began to realize that they would be much better off actually taxing this stuff, and that this experiment in prohibition hadn't actually worked. And if you're ever wondering how a guy like FDR got elected in the first place, you have to understand that he ran on a campaign to repeal prohibition. You could actually get a beer in a bar if he became president. That was his promise. It was a hugely important promise, and it's why he probably made the margin of difference between his losing and his winning. And it was one of the first things he did when he was office. You had the Great Depression going on. Forget the Great Depression. People are really depressed because they want a beer. So, repealed prohibition, and that was the end of it. And so it stayed until, I guess it was 1984 or so, when the federal government toyed with the idea of rewarding states that bumped the law from 18 to 21 for drinking, and with the threat of taking away highway money. So if you don't raise your drinking age, then you'll have a problem that you won't be able to raise enough money to pay for your highways. So every single state went along with it. Now the laws differ from state to state, and you can look them up. Some are more severe than others. But generally, the drinking age, it's not a national law, it's just a national incentive. And during those 30 years, we've seen a recreation of the culture of prohibition in this age group. And I find it just a scandal that it's not a source of public controversy. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that the adults don't know that much about it. They don't really know what's going on. And they don't know if they did know what was going on, maybe they have a sense that weird drinking stuff is going on in this age group, but they don't understand the source of it because the cause and effect is a little bit mixed up to them. I remain very optimistic, though, that we can do something about this, because let's face it, it wasn't too long ago there was a whole generation that wasn't allowed to drink, and they were able to make the case, and it led to a repeal of prohibition. So I think it can happen again. But I think it's going to require the most implausible thing, which is people who are, in this age group, to get active, to open up about the truth, about the culture of drinking that exists on campus today and off campus, and basically among this prohibition. Like, be honest, be truthful, tell the stories, explain what's going on, always draw out the cause and effect, so that the adult world can get wise to what's going on and start to reconsider what we've done, which is essentially a calamity for everybody. As I say, a terrible violation of human rights. So I'd urge you to get active on this subject. And by the way, this is true no matter what your politics. I mean, you might come from a teetotaling Quaker family or Mormons or Southern Baptists like I was raised and hate liquor, well, that's all the more reason to advocate the repeal of this prohibition, because until the adult world and society and normal cultural norms can start governing how people drink in this age group, we will never be able to reestablish sort of civilized standards of drinking again. Now, I hope you don't mind my bringing this up. This is actually, seems to me, a very serious issue. But as I'm sure you're aware, there are many people deeply involved in activism against the problem of campus rape, sexual abuse, quasi-rape, whatever you want to call it, but essentially very dangerous and sometimes coercive sexual activity on campus. And it's weird to me. It's like people discuss this issue, and first they say, is it happening? And some people say, oh yeah, it's a crisis. And there's movies about this. I mean, you watched Lady Gaga's video about this, Until It Happens to You, right? Very touching, very beautiful movie video. And there's a new documentary out about it. Oh, it's a controversy. And this side says, oh, that's wrong. Haven't you seen FBI statistics? Rape is down. You know, it's not going on. This is a lie. It's a myth. I mean, and then there's the issue of cause. Well, this is caused by patriarchy. This is caused by a persistent bias against women, and you know, this is just the beginning of a lifetime of violence against women, and so on and so on. Everything gets mixed up with the politics of MRAs versus feminism, and I just think this has nothing. Well, I don't want to say it has nothing to do with it. It might have something to do with it, but I don't think that's the central issue. The central issue is prohibition. It's all brought about because people are not allowed in this age group, are not allowed to establish a reasonable, cultivated, mature, public culture of mature drinking, of reasonable drinking. And, you know, this is a fundamental thing. I rewatched Lady Gaga's video after thinking about this, and I realized that I think that video relays 3 separate incidences of rape. You know, 2 of which involve alcohol, and all of which are in private spaces, not public spaces, not bars, but yeah, strange abandoned classrooms, dorm rooms, and so on. So this is an issue that I think should unite everybody of every political persuasion, regardless of where you stand on this issue of campus rape. We have to have a legalization of reasonable drinking in this age group so that we can begin to address the problem. So again, I'm not pleading for the, you know, alky 19-year-olds of this world, of which there are plenty. What I'm pleading for is human rights and the right of society to manage its own affairs, and the impossibility of using government force to uplift a generation. Now look, we all know the truth. I mean, this is the most ignored law on the planet. I mean, this is ridiculous. Why do we even pretend it's a law? It's not complied with by anybody. And the statistics on this are just outrageous. When I look at the statistics, the self-reported statistics of people in this age group and how much they drink and when they drink and what they drink, I mean, the idea that anybody's taking this law seriously is ridiculous. All the law has done is to create a very strange and distorted and just really, quite frankly, disgusting culture of alcohol abuse. So everybody has an interest in this, to do something about it. Alert your lawmakers, tell your parents, explain it to your teachers. I'm sure they have some sense. But very importantly, draw out the cause and effect between the imposition of the law in 1984 and the emergence of this vast and complex world of underage drinking that's come about in this country. So I think I'll leave it at that and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Do you guys want to come up here so that he can hear you better closer to the microphone for your question? Okay. All right, go ahead.
First come, first serve.
Okay, so
All right.
this is Madison.
Hello.
Hi. I can't see you, unfortunately. So.
I know, it's okay. Hearing about what you've said about the campus rape thing, how do you feel about bars on campuses?
You mean am I for them or against them?
Well, yeah, but how do you think that there should be bars on campuses, or that they should be able to sell liquor to students directly from campuses?
Yes, I do. I think it's important, and I'll tell you why. I think women need a safe place to go, and dorm rooms are not it, and frat houses are not it. They need a place to publicly drink, where again you can follow the liquor from the shelf to the glass, never letting it leave your eyes. and where you have other people who can potentially watch out for your well-being. There's a bartender who's trained from experience to recognize when problems are coming, and when they do arise, you can be surrounded by people who care about you and get you back to the place where you're safe. I think this would just be, God knows we desperately need this. I mean, women desperately need this. You shouldn't have to hide out in your dorm rooms, which are weirdly unsafe. I mean, they're weirdly unsafe, and I don't need to tell you this, but if you're in an environment that's not public, and you're drinking, and also, by the way, I mean, people in this age group they're not prepared to know like what they're drinking and how much they're drinking, you know, and so mistakes are made, and then when situations present themselves that weirdly seem like rape, women find themselves in an odd position of having to scream no and not having anybody hear them, and then facing the prospect of a really grim, violent situation taking place. So, yeah, it's rape. It's definitely rape, and but women shouldn't be put in this kind of situation. I mean, if you can like separate drinking from your residence or from other private places where you don't feel like you can get away from, then I think you've gone a long way towards at least creating a safe environment for women on campus. And I hope I answered your question. I hope I answered it intelligently.
Thank you.
I've got another one. So do you find, when we talk about the drug war, obviously a big part of the war on drugs not really making any progress is entrenched financial interests who sort of have a vested interest in the perpetuation of the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Do you find that at all with this sort of, or is it purely lack of advocacy from any sort of elected officials that really prevents any progress from being made on this issue?
Yeah, that's a very, very intelligent question. But before I answer it, and I think it's profound, let me just go back to the previous question and say that I was just at a campus at a private college in Virginia that has about 2,000 students, and they have a campus bar, and you can't believe it. It's like so awesome. This bar serves to everybody. They don't card, and they never ask anybody, and they know that they're serving to underage drinkers, and the college president knows it, the faculty knows it, all the students know it, and they do it, and it's routine, and it's awesome. So this campus has said no to this prohibition nonsense, and it's worked magnificently. So every night of the week, that it's a bar on campus, and it's full of people drinking, and you know how they drink? They drink in a reasonable way. You know, they're playing darts, they're having a beer, everybody's happy, nobody's upset. Now, in terms, so I'm sorry to go back, but in terms of the financial interest, if you could do me a favor and think about this a little bit and come up with your theories, because I can't seem to figure it out. If there is somebody who's financially benefiting from this legislation, I don't know who it is, because I can't seem to figure out what the interest groups would be. I know there's Mothers Against Drug Driving, but yeah, they just made a basic statistical mistake. I mean, they look at people getting in drunk driving accidents, you know, at that age group, and they said, oh, somebody are associated with alcohol, let's get rid of alcohol. That gets rid of the deaths. But it didn't get rid of the deaths. And if anything, all it did was transfer them up to a higher age group. So, I mean, you can look this up. I mean, the statistics are ridiculous. But I think the reason it happened was very much the reason prohibition itself happened. As you say, it's just kind of a puritanical culture that was overly attached to the idea of controlling people through the law, and it just made a basic category mistake, and nobody really thought about it. You know, I mean, I think people are so inclined to think that if you just pass a law, that suddenly history and human nature can magically change. If there's more to it than that, I would like to know, and if you can figure out empirically or deductively who's benefiting from this law financially, I would like to know it.
Yeah, I was wondering, because I don't go to school here. My girlfriend's just on the board of directors and I'm visiting. But where I went to school, a little town called Athens, Ohio, They have a special underage drinking task force. They don't do anything. I know one person out of all the people I know who's ever been caught, but it's a specific segment of the police department specifically devoted to underage drinking, which I think is probably a PR thing because we were the number one party in the nation when I was there. But
well, no, I mean certainly that. I mean,
like that are common that vested interest.
I mean, the police are always interested to have another excuse to tax people, arrest people, harass people, get people in trouble. That's
Right.
you know, that's always true. I mean, you just can't believe it. You know what goes on in the name of stopping drinking in this country. I mean, a friend of mine was sitting on his front lawn drinking a beer, and the police drove by, and stopped, put on their sirens, and arrested him. And he spent, you know, like a week in jail, and you know, a year. Trying to get his court charge straightened out. He had to go to classes on you know, God knows what. He lost his license and got kicked out of the ROTC. I mean, for drinking like a Coors Light on his front lawn. You know, it's just, it's insane. So yeah, the bureaucracy benefits from that kind of nonsense. They always love other reasons to get people in trouble, and I mean, maybe you just explained it. I don't know. Maybe that's the whole explanation.
Thank you.
Next question, Alex.
Should I? I know there was a quick mention on drunk driving. I mean, when I was out tabling, we have a big blackboard. Should the drinking age be lowered? Yes, no. We have a bunch of tallies. Naturally, I mean, on a college, it's mostly yes. But there's a good number of no's, and I asked most of the people who tallied no. I asked them, well, why? A lot of them say the correlation between inexperienced drivers at this age and drinking is the reason why they would want to keep the prohibition. Is there a correlation between I suppose drunk driving and I mean I know we see most nations that have lower drinking age also have higher driving ages. We have a very, very low. I mean, we start at 15 years old in the United States, in Florida at least.
Yeah.
So is there?
Yeah, there might be, but I mean, to me, these are separate problems. I mean, drunk driving is one problem.
Yeah.
And I don't exactly. I mean, I have my own views about that. I mean, I live in Atlanta. I asked somebody the other day, what percentage of drivers on a typical Friday night in Atlanta are driving over the legal limit? And I got various answers between 40 and 70%. So, you know, I mean, drunk driving laws are themselves sort of structured to maximize the amount of revenue and criminals that the government create. I mean, to me, what should be illegal is reckless driving, not blood type. But to me, it's just a separate issue, and that presents its own kind of enforcement problems. But if somebody's driving recklessly or doing bad things, then something should be done about that. But I think it's really a separate problem, and especially, you know, technology is assisting here in many ways, because we now have, I'm sure you all use it. I mean, it's an awesome thing to be able to have ride-sharing services or peer-to-peer transportation services where, you know, I mean, you could be 3 sheets to the wind. I mean, just, you know, blasted out of your mind. You can still press a button on Uber, and it can come pick you up and take you home. I mean, I think that's what's solving to the drunk driving problem is technology. It's not police, and it's certainly not the drinking age.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa?
So I was thinking a little bit about what you said, the special interests regarding the legislation, and I was kind of leaning towards the idea of insurance companies being that the original reason states wanted to get funding is because of the highways, and I think there might be some correlation with that. I was also thinking, like, what about all these tropical and like foreign locales where the drinking age is lower and students want to go and drink themselves silly on breaks?
Yeah.
And
does that really go on? I mean, do people actually travel to the Caribbean? I mean, where are you talking about?
All sorts of places.
People go on cruises. Yeah, people
Yeah.
go on cruises, and if you live in the northern United States, you just go into Canada for
we went
just
to
to go
Canada to
drinking.
drink all the time.
That is funny. See, you guys know a lot, but I mean, how tedious was it for you to hear me, you know, lecturing about, you know, 20 minutes to like some stodgy adult? And you know what kids these days do? I mean, you know all this shit. I mean, But I hadn't heard that. That's really interesting. So cruises. This is the whole point of a cruise, huh? I get it. Okay.
There's nothing else fun about a cruise.
Yeah, so the cruise lines are actually behind.
Canada and the cruise lines.
Yeah, that's Canada and the cruise lines. I don't know. I mean, certainly everybody benefits at some level from every law, right? And it's interesting to think about. And it's fascinating in the case of the drug war, right? I mean, the two big people who are against it. Well, there's three groups against the drug war: is the government, Puritans, and drug lords. Right? They don't want their monopoly broken up. So there's probably something like that. Baptist and bootleggers phenomenon going on, in that age group. But if you discover it, by all means, write a paper and publicize it. We need to do everything we can to stop this, and we need to protect the next generation from the nonsense that you're facing right now. I find it appalling, and very, very damaging. Actually, I mean, this is the age at which you're supposed to be like discovering cool ways to, enter into adulthood, and shotgunning beers and slapping wine bags and taking pulls from handles in a pre-gaming night, so you could drink 8 hours of liquor in 30 minutes. That is not the way. But this is what we force people into. So please, I mean, do whatever you can, and don't be shy either. And if somebody tries to say, "What's wrong with you, alcoholic? Can't you just not drink for the next year?" Don't let them intimidate you like that. I mean, just don't put up with it. Just come right back at them and say, "I have human rights, and your laws that you passed that apply to me, not you, have created a disgusting culture of abuse, and I don't want any part of it. Unfortunately, because of your stupid laws, I have to be a part of it." And just come right back at them. Don't let anybody intimidate you like that.
Just a quick question. What's your favorite alcoholic drink?
Well, so tonight, my drink of 2016, which I decided only 10 days ago, is called the Sidecar, and it's and I'll tell you why. Well, 2015 was a year of clarity, of effervescence, of seeing straight, and seeing your way to the truth, of cleansing. And so the drink last year for me anyway was clean gin shaken with just a bit of lemon squeezed in it, and that's it, right? But this year, everything's complicated. Politics is complicated, the economy is complicated, our culture is ever more confusing. So I think we need a drink that reflects a sort of depth and richness and wide interpretive landscape of the world around us. And to me, the answer is obvious. It's the Sidecar. The Sidecar is it. It's a branded drink with bitters. So look it up and order it at the next speakeasy you go to.
John Jackson?
Sure. I was wondering if you think the current and past marijuana initiatives pose a threat to reducing the drinking age if they use the same 21 and 18-year-old policies and justifications.
I hadn't really looked into this. That was going on. These legalizations are still. They have the age limits too that are very similar to drinking.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, they're all 21.
They're all 21. Why is it always 21?
God, how crazy is that, huh? Yeah, they would definitely pose the same problems. I don't know. It's funny how this is. It's like you're always in favor of progress, and certainly legalization with 21 age limit is progress over prohibition completely. But every scrap of the law that's left, it always creates unintended consequences. And I don't think we should stop until we can get to full legalization of everything with no age requirements. And I'm sorry to say that, but I mean that's just what I believe. I mean I think there's always perverse consequences to all these limitations and restrictions. And again, I'm not saying this because I believe in decadence. It's because I believe in maturity, essentially, and the capacity of people to learn to govern themselves. And also I believe in human freedom. That's why I favor these things. Unfortunately, I have another interview starting in about 3 minutes. Can I take just one more question? I'm sorry to cut it off.
I have a question. It's not very. It's looking at maybe the source of the drinking age, not quite as conspiracy theory as the cruising in Canada, but do you think it's possible that a lot of adults don't take these sort of movements or arguments seriously because they themselves had to wait until they were 21, and so they kind of brush it off as, I had to wait, why can't you?
Listen, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but you know what the problem with adults is? I mean, this is the most agreed. So every adult lived a dreadfully corrupt and decadent childhood, without exception. And then they all grow up and they say, well, honey, now that we have a child, we're not going to let this child make the same mistakes we did, aren't we?
You sound just like my mom.
Yeah. I did horrible things, and believe me, I know all about that, you know. And so they always try to reform the next generation, you know, with an exaggerated belief that that parenthood is like, you know, you're playing the role of a potter and clay, and it's just a freaking lie. I mean, for whatever reason, God made every single individual with a free will. I don't know why, but that's just what's true. And unfortunately, parents from the beginning of time keep forgetting that their children are going to do what they want to do. I have like a few more minutes. Well, you know, I just wanted to tell you a funny story when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in the Baptist church, and I left that and embraced the whore of Babylon. And if you don't know what that means, look it up. But I remember we used to get these preachers who would come in, and they'd say, "Everybody, I'm here to talk to you about Jesus. You know, I lived a rough life. You know, it was terrible. You know, I was a youth. I began with drinking, and then I started drugs, and then it was women. And then it was, you know, drugs, and you know, just horrible and abuse. And then finally, you know, I did all these things, and there's countless amounts of decadence and sin, and my whole life was enveloped in nothing but self-pleasure. And finally hit rock bottom, you know, at the late age of 35, and found Jesus. And now I stand before you, a clean and pure man. And I remember thinking when I was about 15, I thought, okay, well then I've got a good 20 years left before I have. Anyway. So hey, listen, I'm sorry I can't stay. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you at ISFLC. You got to be there. All right. Bye-bye, my friends.
Bye. Thank you.